Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the 539th Board Meeting of the California Regional Water Quality Control Board, Central Valley Region. I would like to introduce the board members and staff at this time. On my far left is Carmen Ramirez of Atwater. Between Carmen and myself is John Constantino of Grass Valley. On my far right is Bob Schneider of Davis, and on my right is Denise Cadera of Allensworth. My name is Carl Longley, and I hail from the great metropolis, I can't even talk this morning, metropolis of Fresno. I'll now introduce the executive officer who will introduce her staff. Pamela?
Good morning, Dr. Longley and members of the board. And I apologize for the heat in the room. I'm hoping to get the air turned on quickly before we have a sauna in here. So across the room from me, we have Brett Braidman, who's our staff manager and staff services manager, and he will be keeping our clock and time and keeping us straight there. And next to Brett is Andrew Altavote, Assistant Executive Officer in the Sacramento office, and next to Andrew is Nathan Jacobson, Senior Staff Counsel for the board. To my far left is Karen Lanfranchi Rizzardi, Administrative Assistant for the board, and me, and Executive Assistant. Sorry, I didn't mean to demote you. And next to Karen is Adam Lapitz, Assistant Executive Officer in the Sacramento office, and to my immediate left is Patrick Palupa, Senior Staff Counsel for the board. And to my immediate right is Andrew Dieringer, Staff Counsel for the board. In the audience, we have Clay Rogers, Assistant Executive Officer in the Fresno office, Clint Snyder, Assistant Executive Officer in the Redding office, and Linda Bracamani, Assistant Executive Officer in the Sacramento office. And we have a number of other staff in the audience. And I understand Tam Dodak will be here tomorrow, Dr. Longley.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that information. Carmen, would you please lead us in the pledge?
Ready, salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Going to item 2 of the agenda. In order to conduct our regional board meetings in a fair and efficient manner, we will be proceeding in accordance with the meeting procedures that have been provided with a summary agenda, and they're also available at the staff table and upon request, and are posted on the board's website and are summarized on the computer screens during the breaks. In other words, we make sure they get disseminated well. Any questions or comments regarding these procedures may be directed to Karen Lanfranchi Rizzardi, our administrative assistant, who's sitting over here at the staff table. Proceeding to agenda item 3, are there any board member communications? Yes, Bob.
I had a meeting with the Save American River Association, and I'll try and get that date. I'll get it to Corrine.
Okay.
Yes, I've been participating in the groundwater sustainability management program activities. Attended some meetings in Tipton back in late June, so I'm working with some of the community people as part of that process.
Thank you. 12th June, I attended a Healthy Soils meeting in the governor's office. It's the CDFA is together with the governor's office, is engaged in pushing this governor's initiative, and the outcomes of it can be favorable to water quality. That I'm very thankful for. 18 June, again on 15, 16 July, I attended CV Salt's meetings. Probably one of the more important events in my life. Am I right, David? The 19 June, I attended a Safe Drinking Water Forum in Hanford, California, which was sponsored by the Partnership for the San Joaquin Valley. On 10 July, I was a presenter at the Water Summit, organized by the Governor's Office of Planning and Research. They're looking to move technology into the water supply. In other words, to look to water technology to see where there are opportunities improving water supply and water quality. Very worthwhile effort and one that's also being pursued by my parent organization, if you will, the California Council on Science and Technology. On 20 July, I rode with staff, including Clay, down to Bakersfield to meet with an environmental group in Kern County, focused on oil issues. I left the room when they started talking about specific issues having to that are before us today, so I wasn't there for that. Also, I had a staff person from the Western States Petroleum Association stop by my office and talked with me. We did not talk about anything that's on the agenda today. Actually, I mainly talked to her about CV salts. What else is there? On 22 July, I, together with Pamela and others, attended a Lean Six Sigma meeting in the governor's office, a real noteworthy activity that's been undertaken by the governor's office to improve staff efficiency. And listening to what some of the people had accomplished was really heartwarming in the sense that it's focused on faster turnaround times, much faster turnaround times in some cases, order of magnitude. And I think, Pamela, you're going to be talking about, we in your report talk about the staff person from our office who received an award, or tomorrow?
We will have him come and give a presentation to the board probably at the,
Oh, sounds good. Okay,
instead
good.
of on the staff report.
Thank you very much.
Carl?
Yes.
I just want to say that that my meeting with the Save American River Association was on June 9th.
On June 9th. Okay.
Carl?
Yes.
One other thing. I also attended the governor's water energy event. I didn't attend as a board member. I was there in my day capacity where I deal with energy most of the time. And I thought it was a great event, well put together, lots of interesting dialogue on the water side. But just for the record, I was there.
No, you were there. In fact, you introduced me to some folks from one of the electronic industries, yeah. Anybody else? With that, we'll move on to item 5 on the agenda. Do we have any attendance cards for the public forum? Is there anyone wishing to address any item that's not on today's agenda? You get 3 minutes. Or tomorrow's agenda, for that matter.
Good morning, Dr. Longley, members of the board. I'm Jeff Scharf. I did want to take a minute of your time during the public forum. Again, board members, my name's Jeff Scharf. I'm an attorney here in Sacramento. And, you know, I don't get to do this very often. I'm usually up here in an enforcement proceeding. And so it's nice to be in front of you in a slightly different capacity today. I wanted to... Is that better?
Okay.
Okay. I wanted to, first of all, thank your staff for their assistance on a site that we're involved with here in Sacramento. It's a former Shell station site at 4301 Marconi Avenue. It's an inherited property. My client, Marilyn Wordlow, is in the audience, and she and her brother inherited the property. It's a legacy property of a former Shell station that was decommissioned in the 80s. The site has both fuel and solvent contamination on it. The solvents were discovered, the contamination was discovered in 2003. Because the fuels, it was assigned to the county, and the county investigation completed in 2011 for the fuels component of it. The county handed the site back off to your staff, and it had started to progress and then slowed down. In January this year, I made contact with staff, asked for some assistance, which they have been just instrumental with. And the upshot of it now is that there is a letter request to Shell for both a remedial action plan and update on a soil vapor survey that was to have been submitted to your staff by the end of June. Shell asked for a little bit more time, and that will be coming in this month. We know we have impacts with both TCE and PCE in groundwater. And we're concerned about it, and that's the other reason for being in front of you today. Given the time that has elapsed on this one, we wanted to bring it to the board's attention. I did. also informed the board that we will be working in a cooperative manner. And as you can appreciate, the last thing in the world I want to do is see something result in further enforcement proceedings. We're available to work in a cooperative manner with both your staff and Shell on this site as it goes forward. And with that, I thank you. Any questions?
Thank you, Jeff. Are there any questions?
I don't have questions, but I certainly would like to take the time to thank you for coming and giving us an update before it gets to an enforcement action. Sometimes up here we don't hear about things until things have gotten ugly. And so,
Thank you.
you know, I remember being involved in projects like this as a layperson, and it was, not that I'm anything different now, but back when I was a layperson. And, you know, it was very difficult. It was hard to navigate the system, and you really needed assistance from, you know, professionals like you to help guide us, and it's expensive and it takes time. And so I really appreciate the fact that you're giving us an update before it gets any, you know, any further. And I'm glad to know that staff is responding to you. And certainly feel free to come back if we can help or assist in any way.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, board members. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Move on to agenda item 6, Executive Officer's Report. Is there any discussion?
Just, I was going to mention when I was flipping through it, the success stories. A lot of them start with back in 1990, so whatever number it is. The success stories that are coming around today are, as we just heard, some legacy issues. And I just wanted to note that even though things take a while in this media, that it's nice to see some of these things that have been around a while and discovered and take years to figure out are getting resolved. And so that's it.
Any further comments?
No, I do have 2 presentations for staff.
Yeah, I must just add that when things are going to take a while, it's good to just get started.
Yeah.
And I think those successes and the work that our staff's doing are indicative of that approach, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, it's hard. It's always we can only attack a mountain from our perspective by chipping away at it, and sometimes our workload is like Mount Everest. So the staff's doing an outstanding job with what we have available to us, and the dischargers work well with us too for most of the time. So.
Very good. So at this point, the executive officer is going to make some presentations, and where are we going to stand for pictures? There, so I'll put microphones down.
That's why we put the emblem behind you, Dr. Longley. If you
Now we need like a fan blowing for our hair. And, you know,
I'm with you. Okay, for the first award is going to Patrick Morse, a senior engineer here in the Sacramento office. Patrick supervises the Mercury TMDL unit in the Rancho Cordova office and has consistently provided exceptional leadership when dealing with complicated and seemingly insurmountable issues. He has been a key motivator in helping his staff meet milestones for several efforts, including the Delta Mercury TMDL, the review of mine remediation and land management plans in the Clear Lake and Cache Creek watersheds, the development of the statewide reservoirs Mercury TMDL, including meetings with reservoir owners and operators to develop pilot studies and broad stakeholder outreach. Recently, he extended beyond Mercury to become the needed bridge to maintain the Delta Regional Monitoring Program momentum after our lead staff for that effort accepted a new position outside the board. Under Patrick's oversight, the stakeholder comprised steering committee and 4 technical teams finalized a phased regional monitoring program, developed a funding allocation plan, and initiated a pathogen survey that began in April 2015. In addition, Patrick worked with permitting staff to incorporate language allowing participation in the Delta RMP in lieu of individual discharge monitoring requirements, and has been coordinating the approval of requests from the individual discharges to providing funding for the Delta RMP as a commitment of participation. His motivation, technical skills, focus, and easy manner make him a pleasure to work with and an outstanding staff and manager.
Carl, I just want to say that, you know, mercury has been, and methyl mercury, a personal interest of mine. And I work in the Cache Creek and Pewter Creek regions where we have about 40, in each of those watersheds, 40 plus abandoned mines and legacy issues that will take a long time to fix. But I first started working with Patrick on the Cache Creek and the Clear Lake, Harley Gulch, Bear Creek, TMDLs a very long time ago, and it's the consistent expertise and good work that he and his staff have done is deeply appreciated. Thank you, Patrick.
And Patrick, I know, has been heavily involved working with the folks that are consumers of Delta fish, and also with the tribal community. And I'm quite aware of your work there, and it takes one heck of a lot of patience, and certainly you've displayed both good judgment and great patience.
Yes, he's very calm, has a very calm demeanor. It's very welcome sometimes. So the next award will go to Eric Rapport from our Reading office, a senior engineering geologist. Eric's receiving this award for his outstanding work associated with implementation of the State Water Board's on-site wastewater treatment systems policy, or commonly referred to as the OTS policy. He's a senior engineer, geologist in the Reading office, and serves as the Central Valley Water Board specialist for on-site wastewater treatment systems such as septic tanks and leach fields. The new OTS policy requires local entities such as counties and special districts to update their municipal ordinances and develop plans to comply with the new policy. The Central Valley Water Board expects to see over 30 of these plans submitted for our review and approval, the largest in the state, of course. Eric has coordinated with State Board staff, Central Valley Water Board staff, environmental health directors from across the region, and others to develop consistent guidance and support documents to help the local entities prepare and implement the necessary plans. The OTS policy has proved to be a politically divisive issue, and Eric has worked hard to listen to stakeholder concerns and balance the need for compliance with the policy with the flexibility desired by the local entities. Eric's efforts are resulting in clear expectations and consistent results. Eric is extremely intelligent and hardworking and maintains a positive professional attitude. This assignment has presented him with unique challenges, but that's just the sort of thing Eric loves to take on. So for that, Eric is being recognized.
Carl, can I say one thing?
Certainly.
This is the type of program where we don't have one big discharger. We have lots of little ones, and the cumulative impact is significant. So as someone who lives in a rural area with a septic system, you understand when things go wrong and the impacts that can happen, and having this sort of statewide uniform system. I remember when that came to the board, and we talked about it, so glad to see that being recognized.
Yeah, Eric will be back in front of you with an update on where we are, but by far we're the largest region with the highest number of counties. So our plan, the workload for us is enormous for us to review those plans, and his work has made it to where it'll be a consistent format that's provided to the board, so it'll be easy for review for us, but also it makes it easier for the counties to understand what we're expecting.
And Eric has responsibility for a program that doesn't have high visibility, unlike certain of our programs.
No, yeah, that's right,
And,
but has high consequences if it's not.
And the counties, some of them are more conscientious than others, and I feel for you trying to work with those counties that drag their feet.
Yes, Dr. Longley.
I'm just going to add my little aside. It's really nice to see geologists recognized. So.
Yeah, when can we recognize some lawyers? I think it's time.
Moving on to agenda item 7. Pardon? I don't have them on the agenda for today. Are we to do the minutes today?
It's in item 1.
Is it tomorrow? We're doing them tomorrow. I'm sorry. This time we'll receive an update from Ashley Bourne of Sustainable Conservation. Sustainable Conservation is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to help California thrive by uniting people to solve the toughest challenges facing our land, air, and water. This is an information item only, and no action will be taken, although the board may ask questions and provide direction to staff. Following the presentation, interested parties will be allowed 3 minutes each to address the board. We'll now hear Ms. Ashley Bourne's presentation. Morning, Ashley.
Speak. There you go. Good morning, Chair Longley and members of the board, and Pamela, members of the board staff, and the public. Thanks very much for the opportunity to be here and to talk to you about Sustainable Conservation's work to protect water quality in the San Joaquin Valley. I'm Ashley Bourne. I'm the Executive Director of Sustainable Conservation, and as Carl said, we're a nonprofit that works to help California thrive by uniting people to solve the toughest challenges facing our air, land, and water. Every day we bring together, let's see if that's working. Every day we bring together business, government, and landowners to steward the resources that we all depend on in ways that make economic sense. And that's because we believe that common ground is California's most important resource. Sustainable Conservation has been partnering with agricultural industry since our inception, really over 20 years ago. And Pamela asked me to talk with you today about our partnership with dairy producers and farmers to protect water quality in ways that work economically for the industry. And because we've been partnering with dairies for over 15 years now, I'm going to spend most of my time taking you through our various initiatives to promote more environmentally sound manure management practices on dairy farms, but then also talk about some regional strategies to address the problem of excess nitrogen in areas of high concentrations of dairies. And I also want to talk you through a newer initiative that we've been working on for the past few years to help address the severe groundwater overdraft in the San Joaquin Valley. We believe this initiative of using active cropland with peak flood flows, river flows for groundwater recharge actually can also help improve water quality. So I'm going to warn you in advance. I'm going to take you through quite a bit of material, and I don't expect you to remember it all, but I would like you to take away one key message, and that is the need for more regulatory coordination between agencies across water, air, and greenhouse gas issues. As you all know, water is very complex, so is managing manure. It's very complex, and what Sustainable Conservation would really like to see is to help promote optimizing environmental benefits while minimizing environmental impact harm. So let's start with the work we're doing to promote better on-farm management of manure to reduce nitrate to leaching to groundwater. So Sustainable Conservation regularly holds field days where we arrange for dairy producers to talk to other dairy producers about the benefit of using things like flow meters and variable speed pumps, and these help producers keep track of how much manure and nitrogen they are putting on their fields. And because these technologies don't necessarily save the producer money or bring any additional revenue, we've teamed up with Western United Dairymen for the past few years to advocate for funding from the Natural Resources Conservation Service's Bay Delta Initiative to dedicate cost-share funding to dairy producers to adopt water quality practices in the Merced and Stanislaus counties. And we chose Merced and Stanislaus as a high-priority region because of the shallow groundwater there, the sandy soils, and the high concentration of dairies. From 2012 through 2014, the Bay Delta Initiative provided close to $9.5 million for water quality projects on 120 dairies in those two counties. And in addition to flow meters and variable speed pumps, projects funded were things like solid separators, additional pipelines to get liquid manure to additional acreage for application, and then development of comprehensive nutrient management plans. And the 2015 numbers will be available this fall, and then we plan to advocate for more funding in 2016 as well. We're also partnering with the California Dairy Quality Assurance Program to provide input and feedback as they create an online nutrient management e-learning decision tool, support tool. And the tools ask specific questions regarding nutrient management that helps the dairy producer identify areas for improvement and explains what they need to do. It draws on lessons that Sustainable Conservation has learned from working directly with dairy producers to identify concrete ways that they can improve nutrient management practices. And one of the best aspects of the tool is that it directs them to resources for additional information, cost share funding, and other resources. So with the drought, we've realized that tools for better managing nutrients on dairy farms are even more important now. One of the trends we've seen is that silage farmers, and this is a picture of a silage farm, are switching to drip tape, which you can see in the picture, and that has the, instead, switching from flood irrigation, to drip tape irrigation. And while that's a great way to save precious water, it has the potential to exacerbate the problem of excess nitrogen. And the reason that is that it's very difficult to put liquid manure through drip tape. It just basically clogs it up. And so instead, the farmers choose to use commercial fertilizer as they're fertigating their land. But what that means is the dairy producer then has more excess nitrogen to figure out what to do with properly than they might have otherwise. So because of this, we're in the second year of a pilot effort with Netafim to see if we can install filters for screening that liquid manure so that you could use that in drip tape. And if we can figure that out, that has the potential to really control the application of nitrates from manure more effectively than it would be through flood irrigation. And that could help dairy producers do even a better job of protecting groundwater. Recently, we've been collaborating more closely with the regional board staff to better understand their inspection protocol with the intent of using that information to better prepare dairy producers and their consultants to be ready for those inspections and to be in compliance with the water quality regulations. We're also exploring how the inspection process can better distinguish between highly critical noncompliance and less critical noncompliance, so that dairy producers that are doing good things can feel like they're being recognized for the work they're doing while also being informed of additional improvements that they can make. And then we think that all of us, and I mean the regional board, Sustainable Conservation, and the dairy industry, have an opportunity to use the data from the annual reports that the dairy producers are required to submit to better target inspections, outreach, and technical assistance so that we can all be more effective in our collective work. We've been partnering with Dr. Thomas Harder on the digitization of that data, and we're using our on-the-ground work to interpret the data and what those numbers mean. So we realized a number of years ago that even if all the dairies in California are using best management practices to manage their manure, we're still going to have too much nitrogen and manure in areas, particularly in areas of high concentrations of dairies. So you may be familiar with this map, which shows the 3 areas of high concentrations, those dark purple, the Merced-Stanislaus area, the Hanford area, and the area south of Bakersfield. We believe these are high priority areas for developing a more regional approach to the management of nitrogen. And I'm going to briefly describe 3 of our initiatives here. The first is a low-tech wastewater treatment system that uses red worms and colonies of microbes to harvest nitrogen from wastewater. This is a picture of it here. It was designed by a Chilean company named Biofiltro. Wastewater is sprinkled on the top of that bed, or a biofilter, of earthworms, wood shavings, and gravel. As the water trickles through the biofilter, worms eat through the solids in the wastewater and they excrete castings. And that's a high-value compost-like material which contains bacteria which continues to help eliminate contaminants in the water. The nitrogen in the liquid manure is being converted into the worm castings, worms, and being released as a gas. The initial removal rates we're seeing for the pilot project range from 53% to 91% of the total nitrogen. We won a NRCS Conservation Innovation Grant to test this technology with Biofiltro on a commercial dairy and this is in the Hilmar area. Biofiltro has successfully used this technology on dairies in other countries, but never in the United States. And I want to take a moment to thank the regional board staff for their help in expediting the permit for this technology, as we all see its potential value, particularly, again, for dairies that have limited land to apply their manure on. Next year, we're going to have the final results of the air quality and the nitrogen removal studies, as well as a better understanding of the economics and the scalability of this technology. The second regional initiative we're actively working on is the idea of composting more of the excess dairy manure solids and exporting what we believe is a valuable product for other farms in the region. So we've been investigating how much composting of dairy manure is already happening and what the potential to expand the practice is. And what we've found is that composted dairy manure is highly valued by many growers in the San Joaquin Valley because it improves soil health. However, we believe that the market growth has been held back for a couple reasons. First, there's a concern about pathogens and food safety. But second, there's also a lack of clarity of what would be required from the San Joaquin Valley Air Pollution Control District if a dairy were to add composting to their air permit. And then more recently, the pending state board composting general order has added to the regulatory confusion, as dairy producers are not sure if the requirements of the dairy general order will suffice or if they'll have to comply with the composting general order as well. We'll be issuing a report late summer, early fall, which will recommend that the various agencies that regulate dairies, including the Central Valley Regional Water Quality Control Board, come together to see how they can align their regulations to encourage composting in a way that helps us improve water quality and not significantly harm air quality. We've been in discussions with the regional board staff over this and helping to get clarification, and we'd really like to see the clarification encourage composting, because we see this as a cost-effective way to export excess nitrogen off the dairy farms that don't have enough land to apply it at agronomically correct rates. And Pamela is already in conversations with the California Department of Food and Ag and others on the administration's healthy soil initiatives, and we believe composted dairy manure can be play a key role in that initiative. There's a real need for compost, a lot of compost, and we have a lot of dairy manure that could be composted. The last area relating to dairies I want to talk about is methane. We just issued a report yesterday titled Greenhouse Gas Mitigation Strategies for California Dairies, and this is to help inform the California Air Resources Board's efforts to implement SB 605, as well as the governor's executive order to reduce greenhouse gases by 40% by 2030. For those of you who aren't familiar with 605, it calls on the Air Resources Board to develop a comprehensive strategy for reducing short-lived climate pollutants, including methane, by the end of this year. And dairies are key because they account for 48% of the methane in California, and they are the single largest producer in the state. So our report, which the Air Board asked us to develop because of our many years working with dairies on their environmental issues, including methane, is going to inform their program for dairies. And there's a link to the report on our website, but at a high level, we are recommending that the Air Board's program provide flexibility in the type of methane reduction strategies that they incentivize to accommodate the high variability across dairies and also the changing nature of the industry. There really is no one-size-fits-all.
Ashley, I'm sorry. The people on the webcasting can hardly hear you, so you're going to have to be a rock star on the
Okay,
microphone.
so sorry. Felt so loud. Also, second, to provide incentives, because we know that methane digesters do not currently pencil out economically without subsidies. There's an opportunity to use some of the growing cap-and-trade funds to incentivize digesters and other methods for methane reduction, although that we believe that there'll need to be additional incentives for lesser-known methods, including converting from flush systems to scrape systems. We also believe that the Air Board's program should use performance incentives to the extent possible, since actual methane reduction really depends on the operation of the system. Third, reducing investment risk. It's very difficult to obtain financing for projects based on revenue stream for digesters other than for electricity. You cannot get long-term contracts for vehicle fuel, and then the other types of incentives like carbon offsets and RINs, et cetera, are very volatile, so it's hard to get financing for those. And then lastly, providing regulatory coordination. When implementing these methane reduction strategies, dairies are still going to need to comply, obviously, with the water and air quality regulations. And work's already been done to help reconcile these sometimes conflicting requirements, but continued attention is going to be needed to avoid duplicative efforts and expedite permitting of projects to provide the widest range of environmental benefits. Our report also outlines some short-term research needs. We don't know a lot about air emission and water use impacts or the economics of lesser known methane reduction strategies like converting a dairy from flush to scrape or various forms of solid separation. So to really fully consider these alternatives, we're going to need more research. We also feel we need to better understand the market potential for manure-based products, because we think building a market for those products could be enormously helpful. And then lastly, we need to better understand the environmental trade-offs of various manure management strategies. While reducing methane from dairies is important, we know that dairies are trying to manage a range of practices that all have a suite of environmental impacts. And we also know they're particularly focused on reducing nitrate contamination. So manure management is complex. Each of the many different practices and technologies that a dairy might employ could have positive effects on some environmental media and negative effects on other ones. So for example, converting to a drier manure management system could reduce methane emissions and water quality impacts, but it could increase air quality impacts. It's also possible that a management option might be very effective at solving one problem and do nothing to address another. So a digester, as we know, can greatly reduce methane emissions, but it really doesn't do anything to reduce nitrate leaching to groundwater. So in order to determine what methane reduction strategies provide the most positive outcomes for multiple criteria, we really need a clear understanding of how switching from one management practice to another would either increase or decrease these impacts across the environmental spectrum. And we do believe that environmental co-benefits can be obtained from methane reducing practices, but the efforts really got to be approached in an integrated way to ensure that those benefits are realized and we don't have unintended consequences. So we do plan to follow up this report by organizing a summit of scientific experts in the different environmental media and regulatory agency staff to walk through all these manure management practices and really understand what the benefits and impacts are, with the hope that we can get a collective understanding of how we optimize environmental benefits. So that's enough about manure. I'm going to move on to this last project.
Before you leave that last slide, Ashley, first of all, I saw your report last night, was only able to read the executive summary. I think you did a great job. There's some parts of the report that I take a little bit different direction than you do. And I think the last bullet you had, you talked about environmental trade-offs of manure management strategies. You just pointed out that digesters don't generally have an impact on reducing leaching of salts and nitrogenous compounds to groundwater. You know, I would differ with you on that, because I think that if you go to scrape or vacuum, there are enhanced economic benefits in that you come out with a manure product that has a higher percentage of nitrogen, makes it more it's a better more marketable than otherwise. But also, if you go to scrape, that you get positive environmental benefits all the way around. So it's really this huge matrix, and as you point out, it's a very complex issue. But catching these complexities, I think, is difficult, and you've done a good job starting to do that, I think.
Yeah, in that report, we basically took all of the existing literature and studies that have been done out there, in addition to the additional kind of interview and research we could do over a period of 3 months. But we kind of brought it all together, but we realized there still are gaps, so I do think there is potential for some of the strategies you're describing, but there was not a lot of information about them.
Unfortunately, you're right. So
So wait, can I ask another question?
Yeah.
You brought up a couple times the cross-media coordination, the regulatory coordination, and I know from back when I was at the Air Board that this issue's been, and when I was back at an air district, that's even longer ago, that this has been an issue on the table for a long time. So are you, I mean, that's the question. Is it, are you asking for more coordination because more is more? Or is there a lack, is something sort of, was there a,
So we
are we
think
missing
that-
something?
We think progress has been made, and actually this board staff was involved up around, for instance, methane digesters, the California Department of Food and Ag, Natural Resources Conservation Service, and other agencies all came together to try to figure out how to align regulations to encourage digesters. So, and there was success with that. We really did make progress. But there are a lot of other practices. Composting is a great example where there is conflicting messages that are coming out about the regulations, and that has to be figured out so that they're aligned to hopefully encourage something like composting, which really does have a lot of environmental benefits and not too many of the negative ones. And right now, there's confusion. So that's just one example. So I guess a short answer is we're asking for more because more is needed, but we want to recognize that efforts have been made and they've been positive.
Okay, thank you.
I just need to, apparently the public is having difficulty with all of our microphones, so we all have to be rock stars when we speak into our microphones, sorry.
So I thought before I'd end, I'd briefly touch on this more recent work we've been doing to promote groundwater recharge in the San Joaquin Valley. This is obviously very topical, given the drought and the severe groundwater overdraft there. As you probably all know, most groundwater recharge happens through dedicated recharge basins like the one in this picture. And while we'll build more of these, we'll probably never build enough to capture peak flood flows that will occur with increasing frequency as our climate changes and more of our precipitation comes as rain instead of snow. So Sustainable Conservation believes that there is a significant opportunity to capture those peak flood flows on active cropland whose crops can handle floodwater and whose soils are good for percolation. This strategy was effectively demonstrated in 2011 by a farmer named Don Cameron. He lives at the end of the Kings River. And in 2011, which was our last high water year, he was able to take unallocated peak river flows and spread them on his grape, pistachio, and alfalfa fields. He recharged 3,000 acre-feet of water on 1,000 acres and had no impact on his yields. So we've now conducted a series of crop compatibility and engineering cost analyses to understand the potential for this strategy in the Kings River Basin, and we believe with existing canal infrastructure, farmers could very cost-effectively capture and infiltrate water on their farms to make up 25 to 33% of the average annual groundwater overdraft occurring in the region. As we began to explore this concept, concern about nitrate contamination of groundwater came up, rightly so, given that we'd be having large volumes of water flushing through agricultural soil. Irrigation districts and farmers were both expressing this concern. So we applied for and were awarded a CDFA specialty crop block grant to evaluate nitrate leaching with on-farm recharge. And that study is occurring right now, and we're working on the model to make sure it's useful across the San Joaquin Valley. Our understanding is that the Regional Water Quality Control Board does not have jurisdiction over the application of clean river water, even if there are legacy nitrates and salts in the soil, as long as current farm management practices are in compliance with the irrigated lands requirement. Having said that, our hope is to determine what volume of water would be needed for the recharge to have a dilution effect rather than a contaminating one. So I thought I'd leave you just with a few requests, as long as I was here. We look forward to continuing to work with the regional board staff on how to best use the annual report data to encourage more protection of groundwater and to explore how inspections can incentivize continuous improvement on dairies. We hope the board will clarify how the dairy general order and the new composting general order can be coordinated so that they encourage composting of dairy manure, as we believe this is an important strategy for improving water quality. I would love you to all read our methane report, and I've emailed it to Sue and Adam so they can distribute it to you. You can also find it on our website. As I mentioned, with SB 605 and the cap and trade revenues, there really is a great opportunity to reduce methane from dairies, and we'd like to take advantage of that opportunity to generate multiple environmental benefits, including improving water quality. And then lastly, we hope the Water Board will continue to find ways to coordinate and align its regulations with those of CARB, the Air District, and Cal Recycle so that we can optimize the environmental benefits from changed manure management practices. And with that, I just want to thank you all for your time and attention and for giving me this opportunity to share some of the solutions to groundwater quality and quantity problems that we're working to promote. And I also want to thank Pamela and the Regional Board staff for being so supportive of our work, and we've really greatly valued their input. And then I'd be happy to take any other questions.
Ashley, you correctly identified the difficulty with cross-media regulatory actions, and if the other organizations would only align themselves with us, I'm turning your last comment around, I'm sorry. You know, everything you said about that is very important, but we need to turn the volume knob up somewhere. I don't know where. But maybe the most important thing you said, and something that's been, some other folks I'm working with, Sarge Areen and others, you're familiar with Sarge's effort. This whole bit of on-farm recharge is, if we can do that right, it can go a long, long way to taking care of some of our problems, and so far as water quantity is concerned, groundwater levels. So I commend that you've gone into that area, because there's a lot to do and a lot more to learn before we can do that effectively.
Mm-hmm.
And appreciate the fact you worked on Don's farm. He's a very progressive farmer and happens to be on the Food and Ag Board. I think he chairs it right now.
He chairs the Environmental Science Panel at
that's
California Department of Food and
that's
Ag,
what
but
he
he's
does.
also on the board of the agency.
He also flies the Cessna,
Yes.
but that's another topic. With that said, any other questions or comments?
I in particular, I really appreciated the focus on your presentation today. I'm from the Merced area, and a lot of people that I grew up, you know, friends and relatives all worked on dairies, and so I feel close to this area, but I never really understood, especially as a kid, the complexities and the operations and the environmental angle on operations. So I'd like to maybe meet with you offline and make sure that we can stay coordinated, and I'd like to stay involved in as you have your summit and as things develop. I'm, you know, interested in
That'd be great.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
That'd be great.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
So thank you, Dr. Blank. I would like to point out that we have been working with the Cal Recycle and other agencies on the composting order, which is, I think, coming to the board state board next Tuesday for adoption.
Thank
And
you.
I think we've clarified with them how the dairy program fits into that.
And with that said, before Ashley leaves, we'll take a short break.
Yeah.
And be back 10. We're back in order. I'll let people take their seats. Okay, we're on agenda item 8. At this time, we'll receive an update on the MPDS program. This is an information item only, and no action will be taken, although the board may ask questions and provide direction to staff. After the staff presentation, Peter, I hope I get this correctly, Kozelka from US EPA will give an update on US EPA activities, and interested parties will be allowed 3 minutes each to address the board after that. We'll now hear the staff presentation.
Just need a second to locate it.
And our executive officer is telling me that we have uniformly bad pickup on our mics and that we have to basically yell so the people can hear. At lunchtime, it's my understanding they're going to reboot the whole computer system and try to debug this thing so we can get folks that are out there on the web and watching us can hear what we're saying. I do appreciate any comments from web viewers on difficulties that they have with this system as part of quality control.
And an apology to those in the audience that are getting blasted out of the room.
That's right. It's unfortunate.
Okay, I apologize for the delay there. Good morning, Chair Longley and members of the board. My name is Nicole Morgan, and I am the NPDS Program Manager for the region. Today, I'll be providing the board with an overview of the program and an update of the major tasks staff are working on, including ammonia and toxicity and the drought and climate change. First, I'd like to give a short overview of the program. The NPDS program is a federal program under the Clean Water Act that has been delegated to the state of California for implementation through the state and regional water boards. The NPDS program controls water pollution by regulating point source discharges to surface water. Point sources are discrete conveyances such as pipes or man-made ditches. Since its introduction in 1972, the NPDS program has been responsible for significant improvements to water quality. This list shows a wide variety of programs that the federal NPDS program regulates. This presentation will provide an update on the region's program and will cover permitting activities for POTWs and industrial facilities. There are approximately 500 active individual NPDS permits statewide. 26% of these facilities are managed by the Central Valley Water Board, accounting for 52 major permits and 72 minor permits. There are approximately 16 staff that work on permits in the program. This graph summarizes the major permitting tasks staff work on. The y-axis shows the permit actions, and the corresponding calendar year is shown on the x-axis. The major tasks include renewals and new permits, which are shown in blue. Rescissions are shown in red, amendments are shown in green, and enforcement orders are in purple. Enforcement orders as shown here are TSOs, or time schedule orders, prepared by the permitting staff to allow dischargers time to come in compliance with the limitations or new requirements included in their permits. In 2014, the board adopted approximately twice the average number of permit amendments. This can be directly attributed to the 15 amendments associated with the Delta Regional Monitoring Program, also known as the Delta RMP. In addition, these amendments pave the way for NPDS facilities to participate in the RMP. This chart also predicts how we will end the calendar year this year in comparison with previous years. This graph here shows our projected backlog. The number of permits is shown on the y-axis, and the calendar year is shown on the X. The number of permits adopted by the board during the year is shown in red, expired permits are shown in blue, and the number of backlog permits are shown in green. Permits must be renewed every 5 years. If we do not renew a permit prior to its expiration date, or basically if it's 1 day after that date, it's considered to be backlogged by US EPA. As can also be seen in the graph, the number of permits that expire need to be renewed varies annually, making it difficult to assign resources year to year and creating a backlog. In addition, the number of enforcement orders, amendments, and rescissions cannot always be predicted. This variation and lack of predictability makes it hard to predict our workload. For example, in 2007, we renewed over 40 permits, and by 2009, our backlog was almost eliminated. However, By renewing such a large number of permits in 2007, we created a large workload for 2013 and reestablished the backlog.
Nicole?
Yes,
It's John.
yes, sorry.
When something is backlogged, what's the status of the permit? It just continues until what happens?
Yeah, so as long as the discharger has submitted us a report of waste discharge, basically said, hey, I want to renew my permit within, I believe it's 6 months prior to it expiring, then we go ahead and we continue the existing permit until the time we can bring it back in front of the board for renewal.
And that's recognized by EPA?
Yes.
Okay.
And the other situation, if they don't submit a report of waste discharge, what is the situation then? What is the validity of the report after the 5 years?
Okay, so
Or the permit after the 5 years, I should say.
So after the 5 years, I believe if they do not submit, then it's expired, and then if they are continuing to discharge, they're basically in violation of the Clean Water Act.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so therefore, a backlog reduction plan was implemented last year, which includes adopting an average of 24 permits annually. This would eliminate the backlog over the next 4 years and level out the number of permits that need to be renewed each year. In addition to reducing the backlog, staff are maintaining the permit template to ensure the most recent language is included in each permit and that we're being consistent from permit to permit. Use of the template and other tools helps staff to be more efficient and streamlines the process. We have also started to track the time we spend on major tasks and milestones. This information will allow us to identify any bottlenecks and to identify how long it takes to develop a permit. The time tracking exercise will also identify the time it takes for us to complete other permitting tasks and to manage the facilities. During this fiscal year, we're planning to renew 21 individual permits and to rescind 3 permits. In addition, we're working on modifying our limited threat general order to include provisions to permit projects that are currently covered under our low threat general order. Historically, the majority of these facilities have been drinking water facilities, which are now obtaining coverage under a statewide general order for drinking water facilities. Lastly, staff are also exploring a new general order for several facilities that can meet their effluent limits at the time they discharge to surface waters. These facilities have upgraded their treatment plants to meet stringent effluent limits and are not able to receive dilution credits or mixing zones. The new general order will save staff time in developing individual permits for these facilities. Next, I would like to discuss the ammonia criteria. The U.S. EPA establishes national recommended water quality criteria under the Clean Water Act. We have used this criteria to implement narrative water quality objectives from our basin plan, such as the narrative toxicity objective, and where appropriate to establish effluent limits and NPDES permits. The criteria is a recommendation from U.S. EPA and is not promulgated into law. Therefore, the board has discretion on whether or not to apply the criteria, as it is not mandatory. In addition, the 2013 criteria is based on mussels that are primarily present in waters east of the Mississippi River and may not be present throughout California. The 2013 criteria document states, "Humanoid mussel species are not prevalent in some waters such as the arid West," and provides that, in the case of ammonia, where a state demonstrates that mussels are not present on a site-specific basis, the recalculation procedure may be used to remove the mussel species from the national criteria data set to better represent the species present at the site. Given this, staff recommended for a group study to continue, along with a basin planning effort, to determine how to best implement the 2013 criteria. This is similar to what other Western states are doing, and is a policy call to be made by the board. 1, do we have the mussels that are driving the 2013 criteria, and are they present at the site? And 2, does the recommended criteria apply to mussels found on the West Coast? The introduction to the recommended criteria states that it provides scientific recommendations to states that under the Clean Water Act, we are able to establish water quality criteria to protect designated uses. In addition, the recommended criteria states that decision makers retain the discretion to adopt approaches on a case-by-case basis that differ from those used in the criteria when appropriate. US EPA updated its 1999 recommended criteria in August of 2013. The recommended criteria was revised based on the latest toxicity data for uranoid mussels. These are freshwater mussels that are more sensitive to ammonia than the species that was tested when developing the 99 criteria. This has resulted in more stringent ammonia criteria in water bodies where mussels have historically been present. And for some POTWs, this may result in compliance issues. The recommended criteria, however, may be recalculated for water bodies where freshwater mussels are not present. Therefore, mussel studies are needed to determine the presence or absence of the mussels.
Let me ask you a question right now rather than waiting until later.
Sure.
Focus that you're giving us is on mussels, but are they in fact the most sensitive species to be protected?
They are, short answer is yes. However, on the West Coast, that we don't know that specific answer because of the type of species of mussels. So if we don't have the species that was used in developing the 2013 criteria for within our surface waters, the answer may be no, that for us, mussels are not the most sensitive species to be protected.
In fact, it may be copepods or some other members of the food chain.
Yes.
Okay.
So that's what we're hoping to find out through these special studies.
Very good. Thank you.
And we have the ability to use a different species if necessary?
Yes, we can go through, there's a recalculation method that we can use. And so once we have additional data, we'll make a determination of whether or not it's worth going through that method to recalculate the ammonia criteria to be specific for the species that we have here in the Central Valley. Okay, so we have been using US EPA's 99 recommended ammonia criteria on a permit-by-permit basis. Therefore, when the 2013 recommended criteria came out, we assumed that we should be doing the same thing. However, after more questions than answers were raised while trying to implement the criteria, and also based on lessons learned when implementing the US EPA recommended criteria for aluminum on a permit-by-permit basis, staff recommended for the new criteria to be implemented through a basin planning effort at the April board meeting. So a little bit about the aluminum criteria. The criteria was issued in 1988 and updated in 99. The 99 update indicate that many high-quality surface waters in the U.S. contain aluminum concentrations higher than the recommended criteria. However, it did not affect the beneficial uses. So we did toxicity testing using the surface waters from our region, and the test indicated that aluminum in our surface water is less reactive and less toxic than the studies that were used to develop the 99 criteria. Therefore, it was found that higher limits for aluminum within our region are still protective of beneficial uses.
And why would that be? Is it a pH factor, or is it the chemical form of the aluminum, or what would be the reason for that?
Dr. Longley, it has to do with the pH and the hardness. The aluminum criteria were developed using very, very low hardness levels, and also pH in conjunction. So what happened was, when we looked at waters in our areas, they didn't fall into that same subset where the criteria was developed.
I know we've been through this before, for the record.
So
Thank you.
Dr. Longley, it was again an east versus west, arid west, and the arid west just had a little different way to evaluate the toxicity level of it. And that's why they recognize that in the ammonia, and that's why we're saying maybe we should with the aluminum, we put them in permits, then we took it back out of permits. And I would like to avoid doing that double work and just do the basin planning process to address it properly through our permits.
That makes good sense. Thank you. Thank you.
So one more thing on this too is we're implementing with both aluminum and ammonia our narrative objectives from our basin plan. And so these objectives are recommended, and what we're saying is in our basin plan there's no toxics and toxic amounts, and when these studies are done and we find that these criteria are overly or too low for that objective, then we can use a different criteria.
Very good. Thank you.
Okay, so for aluminum, in the end, we decided that a watershed approach was more appropriate to implement the criteria. So board staff are working with the dischargers and stakeholders to implement the 2013 recommended ammonia criteria. In April 2014, dischargers were required to increase monitoring and to submit information regarding their ability to comply with the more stringent criteria. By mid-July 2014, dischargers were required to inform board staff of their intentions for moving forward. Dischargers could demonstrate compliance with the new criteria or indicate that they would conduct mussel studies to evaluate the presence or absence of mussels. Most dischargers have joined forces to conduct a group study. Some, a small number, have decided that they would move forward with individual studies. The initial individual studies have started to come in, and the group study is due this October. To date, board staff have participated in 4 policy and permitting meetings with US EPA, the federal and state fishery agencies, and the Civiqua Special Project Group. As a result of the meetings, it has become clear that existing data can be used to determine where mussels have been present historically. However, it is not clear where mussels have not been historically or where they could be expected to be found. Input from experts and additional field studies will be necessary to provide the clarity needed to implement the 2013 recommended criteria. On March 3rd, 2015, a supplemental notice to the April board meeting was issued informing public and interested parties that staff are recommending to continue using the 99 recommended criteria to calculate the ammonia limits included in NPDES permits until a basin planning effort can be completed. While it can take staff up to 10 years to complete the basin planning effort, it will be based on science, allow staff time to determine how to best implement the recommended criteria, determine where mussels are or are not present, and if the 2013 criteria apply to mussel species found on the West Coast. The criteria will be implemented on a permit-by-permit basis using the most recent data from the current permit term to calculate the appropriate effluent limits for ammonia to protect beneficial uses. Another hot topic for the program this year is chronic toxicity. In order to comply with new regulations that place stringent limits on byproducts that are formed by using chlorine as a disinfectant, many facilities install UV systems, as shown in this picture. Unfortunately, an unintended side effect is that these facilities are now seeing an increase in low-level toxicity. The amount of toxicity is so low that even after spending hundreds of thousands of dollars investigating the issue, facilities at many times cannot determine the cause. While initial studies indicate that the UV systems are contributing to the issue, they're not the only source of these low levels of toxicity. The basin plan's narrative toxicity objective states, all water shall be maintained free of toxic substances and concentrations that produce detrimental physiological responses in human, plant, animal, or aquatic life. One way we're able to determine if discharges to surface water comply with the objective is requiring dischargers to conduct 3 species chronic toxicity testing. As each of the three species is more sensitive to different constituents, dischargers are able to narrow down which is causing the toxicity by which species failed the test.
I guess I'd like to talk offline to somebody about this because that's interesting. Chlorine's always been linked with disinfection byproducts, which of course have a human health issue, but which some of those could be toxic to microorganisms. And now
Yes.
we're seeing that apparently because of the oxidation capability of chlorine, it's in fact creating a benefit, if you will, insofar as low-level toxicity is concerned. I'd just be curious if there's been other studies looking at ozone, looking at UV with peroxide, where you generate a lot of free radicals, if comparing the low toxicity issues coming off of those processes. But that's something we can talk about offline. Thank you.
Okay, sure. Historically, facilities have had high levels of toxicity. The high levels have been addressed, and this is a huge success for the program. However, we are now seeing increase in low level of toxicity and are concerned about the large amount of money that is being spent to figure out the issue with minimum results. Our permits include a trigger for chronic toxicity. If the discharger exceeds this trigger, there are specific steps that the discharger must follow to come back into compliance with their permit. In general, the first step is accelerated monitoring. During accelerated monitoring, the discharger conducts 4 additional tests. If all 4 pass, they're done. The discharger can also stop accelerated monitoring if they identify what caused the exceedance and fix it. However, if the discharge fails another test while conducting accelerated monitoring, there are additional steps that they must take. The first step is a toxicity reduction evaluation, also known as a TRE. In a TRE, the discharger is to investigate and identify the cause of the toxicity, specific actions that will be taken to mitigate the impact of the discharge, and to prevent the reoccurrence of toxicity, and a time schedule for these actions. Second, a toxicity identification evaluation, or TIE, may be required as part of the TRE. A TIE is a set of procedures to identify the specific chemicals responsible for the toxicity. These procedures are performed in 3 phases, which are characterization, identification, and confirmation. Over the past 4 years, board staff have noticed an overall decrease in the magnitude of toxicity reported and a potential increase in reoccurring but intermediate low-level toxicity at facilities that have converted from chlorine disinfection, and there's a picture of a chlorine channel there on the top, to UV, which there's a picture on the bottom. In this case, low-level chronic toxicity is defined as toxicity less than 2 chronic toxic units, or TUC. As a result of toxicity being intermediate and occurring at low levels, several dischargers have conducted multiple-year studies accruing up to $1 million in associated costs, and many times have not identified what is causing the toxicity. When the cause has been identified, it has primarily been due to one of 5 reasons. 1, poor sampling procedures. 2, low hardness in the source water. 3, algae sticking to the sampling glass and not being counted, also known as plating. 4, the UV system not being cleaned often enough. Or 5, the UV system causing reduced cell growth in algae. Board staff took a look at a total of 32 facilities in the region from January 2011 through June 2015 to gain a better understanding on the toxicity trends. We looked at 17 facilities from the Sacramento office, 5 from Fresno, and 5 from Redding. Of the 32 facilities, 38% use chlorine and 62% use UV for disinfection. For comparison, region-wide, approximately 51% of our facilities use UV and 49% use chlorine. This chart compares the number of exceedances at UV and chlorine facilities for each of the 3 tests. The chlorine facilities are shown in orange and the UV facilities are in red. The first 2 bars compare the reported exceedances when testing with fathead minnow, the second 2 with water flea, and the last 2 with algae. As can be seen in the chart, there is not as significant of a difference between the fathead minnow test as there are with the water flea and with algae. When comparing facilities that use UV versus facilities that use chlorine, there is noticeably more reported toxicity at facilities that use UV. This table also shows a comparison of toxicity data for chlorine and UV facilities. The table summarizes the number of times facilities reported toxicity and breaks up the data into 3 categories: low, medium, and high toxicity for each of the 3 tests. Less than 2 is considered low here, 2 to 8 is considered medium, and greater than 8 is high. By comparing the data this way, staff were able to verify that the majority of the toxicity that we are currently seeing at the facilities is low level and is primarily occurring at UV facilities. Staff then took a look at the data to see if any other potential trends could be identified. This graph compares the annual average toxicity reported by chlorine and UV facilities. The graph illustrates 2 things. 1, as more UV facilities were installed in 2010 and 2011, there was an increase in toxicity, which may be due to inadequate cleaning of the UV system or algae not being properly counted by the lab. Both of these issues have been identified and are being addressed. And 2, the overall toxicity at chlorine facilities has significantly decreased since 2006. Once again, this is a major success for the program. A case study was conducted at one of the facilities managed by the Sacramento office. The facility transitioned to UV in 2007 and began seeing low levels of intermediate toxicity in July of 2009. The toxicity was seasonal and limited to algae growth. In 2011, in order to determine whether a unit process and the treatment plant was responsible for the observed toxicity, the discharger took samples up and downstream of each individual process. The discharger found a significant decrease in algae growth downstream of the UV system, indicating that algae growth in the sample was significantly reduced relative to the lab control, or the discharge was toxic after the UV system, but not before the UV system. Additional data was collected through 2012, confirming the initial conclusions. It appears that the UV system may be contributing to the low levels of toxicity seen at this facility. However, additional tests also showed that the discharge was not toxic to the environment. Board staff are currently working with Civiqua and toxicity experts to develop a group study to look at the low levels of intermediate toxicity at facilities using UV. Goals of the study are to determine if UV systems are actually causing the toxicity and if the low levels are actually toxic to the environment, and if so, what steps should be taken. One thing to note is that the toxicity tests are statistical. And if there is a difference between the sample and the control, the test could state that the effluent is toxic when it really isn't. Therefore, the study will consider all issues, including sampling and lab procedures and the type of treatment. Another item that staff have been working on is revising language that's included in our permits to clarify that we're using ambient hardness values to calculate the effluent limits for hardness-dependent metals. Court decisions have explained that the board must calculate effluent limits for hardness-dependent metals based on actual ambient hardness values of the receiving water. Staff have been using this approach. Permit language has been updated to clarify this point. You'll hear more about this tomorrow during item 21 for the amendment to the Sacramento Regional County Sanitation District's permit. In addition, State Board is working on a statewide hardness policy to provide more guidance to the regions. NPDES permitting staff have also been amending permits to take into account impacts of the drought. The majority of these requests that we receive deal with the increase in concentrations due to water conservation and to the drought. While our dischargers are seeing an increase in overall concentration of several constituents, they have not seen a significant increase in the loading of these constituents. Therefore, staff have been working with the dischargers to include triggers in their permits to hold them at their current loading performance when appropriate. In addition, it was recently brought to staff's attention that as the drought continues, water near some of our facilities' outfall is starting to become brackish. As we regulate these facilities as inland discharges and not as discharges to saline waters, we're keeping an eye on this as it may require us to change the way we regulate these facilities if the water at their outfalls truly becomes basically ocean water, if it becomes really salty. And it may change how we calculate their limits. The drought is only a potential part of climate change. This is something that we're going to have to continue to work on. We're also working to become more proactive and rather than reactive. To do this, permitting staff are working with Andrew Altavolt, Assistant Executive Officer in the Sacramento office, to develop a climate change work plan for the region. Additional details regarding the plan are scheduled to be brought to the board in December. Any questions?
Thank you, Nicole. Are there any questions by board members? Go ahead, John.
So thank you for that presentation. I thought it was well done. On the last couple slides, drought and climate change, and we've had a couple of workshops that I led that focused on that, and it's good to see that we're thinking about being proactive in both. The first question I had is on the brackish water issue.
Yes.
Are we expecting those trends to be permanent, or just because we have a drought now? I just didn't want to. The question is, are we thinking that an NPDES permit would permanently switch from one to the other, or how's that thought process?
At this
working?
point, I don't think we expect the trend to be permanent. It's one of those that we've learned about it, so to try to be more proactive about things, we want to make sure that we are paying attention to this as an issue. It's not something that I would say that we had a focus on previously.
Okay. And then on climate change, I know the state board is starting to take a lead, which is a positive step, and so I'll be interested to see where all that turns out. But I'm glad that people are thinking about that in terms of water quality. As far as the ammonia and some of the other issues, I'm looking forward to tomorrow's discussion as well.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? Go ahead.
I have a question. Back on your slide number 9, you were talking about different types of NPDES permitting programs, and at the last one said end of pipe general order. So what kind of facilities might an end of pipe general order be considered for?
Now, we have several facilities. You can say some of those are the Nevada County facilities where they've done extensive upgrades to their plants, where they now have tertiary treatment. They have, they are complying with Title 22, the recycled water. And so at the end of their pipe, they can meet all of their effluent limits prior to discharging to the surface water. So what we're looking at, what we've identified is that, one, we are issuing almost the same permit individually to each of these facilities. So we can take that and put it into one general order and then cover each of those facilities under one order versus having an individual one for all of them.
Any further questions? Once again, Nicole, thank you for a very good report.
Thank you.
Is Peter Kozelka here by chance? Yes.
Morning, Board Chair, Board members. I'm Peter Kozelka, the NPDES liaison from US EPA Region 9 to your board. And thanks to Nicole and all your staff. your staff do a lot of work related to permits, not only for the state, but also graciously for us. So this program has been delegated to the state. We like to think we work in partnership with you all, and even though we do have an oversight role, there's a lot of communication, a lot of productive discussions, and a lot of support, technical support as well. So my goal is just to give you sort of the 4 items that I think are relevant, that are slightly different from what Nicole's was in terms of an overall update. And 2 of those, the sufficiently sensitive methods rule has already been finalized by EPA, and the permit quality review has been finalized by EPA, so they're sort of in yellow, and the other 2 are things that we're in draft and are working on. So let me start with the first 2. So the sufficiently sensitive methods rule came out in 2014. And essentially the rule is saying that amongst all of the analytical methods in the Federal Register Part 136, the permitting authority, essentially the board in this case, has the ability to require the most sensitive method that are listed there. And in the case of mercury, it's kind of the most easiest example, and I think perhaps the most valuable one for you all, is that there are 3 different methods presented in Part 136 for analyzing mercury. And as time has gone on, as technology has improved, we've gotten to more sensitive methods. And essentially, EPA is saying if we use this rule, and we give you all the authority of this rule, we don't have to retract the older method. We'll just let you use the more sensitive ones to get detection limits that are below either the water quality criteria and or the effluent limit itself. And this will probably play forward successfully in that other methods for other pollutants will improve over the course of time. So I don't think this is going to be a cost burden in this particular case. The method 1631 for mercury has already in this area become commercially cost effective with other previously used methods, and your permits have already started to include 1631 in order to get reliably low detection limits and make effective management decisions using that information. The second topic here is the permit quality review. So essentially, EPA Region 9 has gone to various states over the course of the years and done a review of permits. In this case, we looked at roughly 30 different permits from the San Francisco Board, the LA Board, and the Central Valley Board, and 1 from the State Board. And we look at these permits and try and provide essentially some overarching suggestions. And 2 recommendations came out of that. There's probably a bunch of individuals, but one I'm trying to categorize into 2. And one was a modification to the template that's used to write the individual permits. Nicole mentioned there's a template. Essentially, State Board sort of houses this template, and then the regional boards take it and then sometimes individually modify it. But we found some things that we thought should be included in that template. And so we've made some recommendations to that. And State Board has actually come out recently, I think it was last month, and said we've incorporated some EPA revisions as well as some state desired revisions, and we're currently looking at those, and we'll give some feedback to State Board about that. It's a good thing. I think it's going in the right direction. Real simple stuff, and yet appropriately addressed. The second thing that came out of the permit quality review was related to the issue of the idea of data outliers, and these are essentially high-level concentrations, and how do you interpret those high-level concentrations. Within a permit, there's this thing called the reasonable assurance analysis, and you look at that data and you interpret that data to determine whether or not effluent limits are included. And I just want to report to you that there's been some discussion back and forth between our office and your office as to how to treat those data outliers. Recently, it's been very successful in that your staff have been able to explain if there's a unique facility circumstance or some QC concern about that data point, that outlier is okay to remove from the data set. And so I just wanted to say that that's a good thing. Okay, the e-reporting rule is...
Excuse me 1 second, Peter, before you go on. Was there any discussion on how you handle data that lies between the quantitation limit and the detection limit?
We would like it to be addressed by a more sensitive method if that's possible. That's an easy answer.
That's the easy answer. So it's addressed by the more sensitive method, and you still have a quantitation limit.
Yes.
And
We haven't reached an agreement on that one, but it's not, I'm not sure it's an easy place to reach agreement.
Okay, you answered my question. Thank you.
Sure. The e-reporting rule is something that EPA has been working on since 2013, and essentially is going to be divided into two different phases. Phase one, I just want to correct this slide, it's not just POTW discharge monitoring reports, but all monitoring reports for all individual facilities. That would include what we would, in the technical term, call majors, meaning large facilities, versus minors, meaning smaller facilities. And the other area for your concern would be biosolids reports. And essentially what we're trying to do is to get that into some sort of e-reporting format so it's easier for the discharger as well as for the regulator in order to be able to interpret that information. State Board is working on this, and they recognize that if this rule were to become final in December of 2015 and the implementation is required 1 year later, they have a plan that will be able to address all the majors, minors, and the biosolids reports, as I understand it. The phase two would get some more time in the sense that they're going to deal with the general permits as well as the CAFOs, the pretreatments, and the sanitary sewage overflows or the combined sewage overflows in the industrial sector. And that would be as much as 5 years once this rule becomes final. And another rule that's coming forward that I thought would be worth paying attention to is the dental amalgam rule. Essentially here we're trying to get at the fact that the dentists are using mercury in their processes for fillings, or have been, maybe they're phasing it out, and that the mercury is included in the discharges. And so this particular rule would be only affecting those wastewater treatment plants that have a pretreatment program. And the goal would be to try and remove as much as 99% of the mercury prior to reaching the actual wastewater treatment plant. We've received some comments and have essentially recognized that there are some facilities that might not be needed to be included in this. There are some dentists out there who don't use mercury at all. They're doing oral surgery, that kind of thing, as well as the fact that if you can't reach 99% removal, could you agree with 95%? I think that based upon which amalgam separators are used, whether they're historically installed or more recent ones. We're still considering this rule, and don't have a current date right now as to when it would be likely to become final. And once it was, the initial proposal said it would be 3 years after the final date it would become effective. So that's my version of updates. Thank you very much for the time and appreciate to be here.
Are there any questions? Once again, I'll beat a dead horse. It's important, I think, that we continue discussion on how we handle JFLAG data. It's an issue that comes up. I know that it's been a point of contention between this board and Region 9, and I'd rather it not be. I'd rather if we could find a way to address it.
Look forward to that.
Thank you. Yes.
I guess I would just say that I appreciate, the recognition that staff does a lot of heavy lifting on the NPDES work, and I know that requires a certain amount of trust from Region 9, and so I hope that as you all continue to work together, that when there's an opportunity to give fair consideration to the work that staff does, and certainly that they have the best interest of protecting the environment and groundwater, at the highest level as well.
Yes, agreed.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. I have a card for Debbie Webster, Executive Officer of Civiqua.
Good morning, Chair Longley and members of the board. Debbie Webster, Executive Officer of the Central Valley Clean Water Association, and we are a nonprofit group representing, many of the wastewater treatment plants who collect, recycle, discharge, and do various other things for communities in the Central Valley. I appreciate.
And might I add, you're a loyal and important member of CV Salts.
Well, thank you. Yes. Civiqua and our members really take to heart protecting the environment, and that is where we think we just have very common goals with what the board is doing and what we are trying to do. We do that 24/7, and at the same time, we are also really sensitive that our ratepayers are paying for the service. So we make sure that when we're asked to do actions, that they have environmental benefits associated with them. And so I wanted just to start out to say I really appreciate the staff and the management's working with us on a lot of these water quality issues. I think Nicole had brought up a couple of them. I want to highlight them just for the next couple minutes, but for ammonia, the Civiqua is working with around 50 POTWs in the Central Valley, trying to do I shouldn't say trying to do. We are doing, and we're in the process of doing a freshwater mussel studies. As Nicole said, our mussels are not the same as East Coast. We are working with different regulatory agencies, and one that wasn't mentioned up there that has been really useful is actually the Nature Conservancy, who has done a lot of work identifying where freshwater mussels exist in California, both historically and currently. But we have found that there are data gaps, and we're working on right now what we call phase 2A, which is taking the DNA of mussels that do reside in California where they reside, and figuring out how to apply that knowledge to take samples to find out where they exist, where there are data gaps. And so this next part of our study will be taking us actually through probably about this time, actually less than this time, probably about June of next year, at which time we hope that if that pilot study is successful, that we'll be able to initiate that more region-wide and get a better idea of where, filling in some of those data gaps, and certainly providing a tool for others to use to fill in other areas where POTWs might not exist, but where that information is needed. Another project that we've been working collaboratively on with the board has been mercury, and we have been doing our control studies as required by the TMDL, but really finding out a lot about how POTWs control mercury and methylmercury, and what type of management options might make sense. As Chair Longley mentioned, we're working with CV salts. There are permitting issues that we're working with your board, but overall, I just really want to say we appreciate, I'm almost there.
Okay, just keep going.
We appreciate just the willingness to work and making sure that we have science and regulations and just implementation that is protective, but that is not, in a sense, providing a huge cost burden with no environmental benefit. And so that I want to say thank you to, and thank you to your management and staff. They've been great to work with.
Thank you, Debbie. Any questions? You're so thorough. That's your problem. See, you don't generate questions. Thank you. With that, we'll well, first of all, are there any comments by members of the board before I conclude this item? Very good. I want to thank staff and all of those who presented for their input and very informative MPDS program update. We'll now move to agenda item 9. At this time, we will receive an informational update on proposed amendments to the water quality control plans for the Sacramento and San Joaquin River and Tulare Lake basins. The amendments would establish a region-wide process for evaluating municipal and domestic supply beneficial use in agriculturally dominated surface water bodies. As you know, this is an issue that this board has wrestled with in the past when we've considered certain discharge permits, and through coming up with a basin plan amendment that addresses this, it will certainly enhance the way we can address these particular issues. This is an information item only, and no action will be taken, although the board may ask questions and provide direction to staff, and interested parties shall limit their time to 3 minutes, unless you possibly we can extend your time if necessary. We'll now begin with staff presentation.
All right, good morning, Chairman Longley and members of the board. My name is Ann Littlejohn, and I am a senior environmental scientist here in the Rancho Cordova office.
And before you go
Is
any
it not-
longer, I'd like to interrupt here. About how long do we have on the, have we estimated this item's going to take?
About an hour.
So this is about an hour, which is going to run us up to noon time. And for those that are here for the last item, the Valley Water Management Company Racetrack Hill Facility in Kern County, I can say at this point that we will not start item number 10 on the agenda until 1 o'clock or later. So if folks want to go and take a long lunch, they can do that and not worry about missing out. With that said, I'm sorry to interrupt. Go ahead,
No,
please.
that's fine. I wasn't close enough to the mic anyway. Let's try this again. So today I will be presenting an informational item related to the proposed Basin Plan Amendment to establish a region-wide process for evaluating the municipal and domestic supply or MUN beneficial use in agriculturally dominated surface water bodies. So this past April, we held a workshop at our Central Valley Water Board meeting down in Fresno for this proposed Basin Plan Amendment. And at that workshop, we provided a background on the project, and we explained why we are working on this Basin Plan Amendment, which is related to the application of the state's sources of drinking water policy. As incorporated into our Basin Plan, the policy applies the municipal and domestic supply beneficial use to all surface and groundwater bodies unless they are specifically identified in the Basin Plan as not having the MUN use. Because the principal water quality objectives that are protective of the MUN use are the primary and secondary maximum contaminant levels, or MCLs, which are essentially tap drinking water standards, there's been concern that the MUN designation may not be appropriate for ag-dominated water bodies. At the April workshop, we evaluated various project alternatives for this amendment, and we identified 3 key issues. The first one pertains to the level of detail needed for the Basin Plan for the potential future evaluation of over 6,000 water bodies. The second issue is related to a new proposed beneficial use category called limited MUN, and this category would be used for water bodies that are not clearly falling under one of the exceptions of the state's sources of drinking water policy. And the third pertained to monitoring and surveillance requirements to ensure that any changes in our current policy did not impact beneficial uses in other downstream water bodies. During the workshop, board members expressed interest in having an update on the development of this limited MUN beneficial designation. So the focus of today's informational item is on this limited MUN issue. We will be discussing the outcomes of a June public stakeholder meeting we had in June, and some of that information is included with your agenda packet today. In the last 2 weeks, we've also had the opportunity to meet with representatives from the State Board and US EPA, and I will be discussing their comments as well. Okay. There we go. Here's an agenda for today's discussion. We'll start with a brief reminder of the preferred project alternative, which is a water body categorization process. And I'll explain how the limited MUN fits into all of it. Next, we'll discuss the options for a limited MUN definition, followed by options for a water quality objective. And this will include review of the selection criteria used to evaluate those options. We will conclude with next steps, and I'll make some time for comments and questions. As a reminder, at the April workshop, we focused on the preferred project alternative, which was to develop a region-wide MUN evaluation process using a water body categorization flowchart. And this is to identify different ag-dominated water body types. The flowchart seen here is in your agenda packet, and it focuses on categorizing water bodies based on their inherent characteristics. This flowchart is part of a proposed process to enable water agencies or other stakeholders to consistently evaluate the types or categories of water bodies in their district in order to determine the appropriate immune use and level of protection. The process would only be used for water bodies that are not listed in the basin plan and where the immune use is not already occurring. A water body categorization report would be required from agencies requesting this evaluation of the immune use, and the Central Valley Water Board staff would then review the report and verify that the correct categorizations were made. The final approved report would place ag-dominated water bodies into one of these 7 categories. Water bodies that fall into certain categories, like the C1 or the M1 water bodies, would be eligible to have their immune use de-designated because they meet one of the exceptions in the state sources of drinking water policy, and that's exception 2B for water bodies that convey or hold agricultural drainage. However, others of these other categories in this list do not so clearly fall under the exceptions in the state sources of drinking water policy. And so these are the categories that we're focusing on today. So which categories are we talking about here? The categories include constructed or modified water bodies that convey agricultural irrigation supply water, and also natural water bodies that may convey agricultural drainage, supply, or a combination of both. As I just mentioned, these water bodies that are in the limited immune category do not fall under one of the exceptions of the sources of drinking water policy. However, as ag-dominated water bodies, it may not be appropriate due to these inherent characteristics that they have to protect these water bodies for the full immune use, which requires compliance with primary and secondary MCLs. In addition, the California Toxics Rules, or CTRs, related to the protection of human health for the consumption of water. These limiting inherent characteristics may include low or intermittent flow conditions, such as in ephemeral streams. Alternately, an irrigation supply channel may only have water in it during the growing season, and these supply channels may often be drained or have their water held for management activities such as dredging or aquatic pest control. So the water bodies falling under the proposed limited immune category may also have naturally occurring elevated background constituent concentrations. For example, the Sacramento River Basin, there are some areas with elevated levels of arsenic, and in the San Joaquin River Basin, there's historically high levels of salts. So in order to supply a full immune use, these types of water bodies may require a change in treatment, something above additional or conventional methods so that they can supply a reliable source of drinking water, or they might need a change in management where instead of having the water flow only part of the year, they have to supply a year-round supply of water. To provide an example of what type of water body may fall under the limited immune designation, I have a map here of the Willow Slough near the cities of Woodland and Davis. And this Willow Slough was brought up in the discussion at the April workshop. So we went ahead and looked back at the 1992 Inland Surface Water Plan report. And in that report, Willow Slough was described as a naturally ephemeral ag-dominated water body. And it originates in the confluence of the North Fork and the South Fork of Willow Slough, and it flows down to this pink one here, which is the Willow Slough Bypass. And the Willow Slough Bypass is a constructed flood control channel. Willow Slough is not listed in the basin plan, so it currently has the immune beneficial use designation. And during the irrigation season, Willow Slough is used to carry both irrigation supply and drainage water. And the main portion of this channel from the confluence of the two forks down to this junction here flows for about 9 miles, and when it hits Willow Slough bypass, water can continue north where it eventually leads to the Yolo bypass, or can continue on into the Willow Slough bypass. And these downstream water bodies from Willow Slough are not designated with immune use. So when we look at the characteristics of this type of water body, we see that it is ephemeral. So during the irrigation or summertime, it normally would not have water in it if it weren't for the introduction of water for agricultural activities. It carries a combination of agricultural supply and drainage water throughout the season, and it has fluctuating flow conditions depending on agricultural demands and the managed diversions. Another example would be a supply channel on the east side of the San Joaquin River Basin. There are some constructed ag supply channels that are often concrete lined that divert water below the rim dams for irrigation. Water supply in these water bodies may be augmented with groundwater, especially in a year like this where we're having severe drought conditions. So the channels are highly managed and maintained for ag operation because that's their intended purpose. And they may have highly fluctuating flows and ongoing maintenance activities to keep these waterways open. Okay, so now in order to establish a new limited immune beneficial use designation for these types of water bodies, we must first develop a definition of the use and then have the associated water quality objectives to protect that use. So as a reminder, the current definition for the full immune use is uses of water for community, military, or individual water supply, including but not limited to drinking water supply. And the water quality objectives to protect that use are the primary and secondary MCLs, as well as the CTRs for human health protection. If you turn to page 4 of the 7 packet that's in your information handout for this item, you will see 4 options for a limited immune beneficial use designation, or definition, excuse me. These were developed at the most recent stakeholder meeting. And the first 2 are centered around the concept of protecting the water body for non-potable uses. So in other words, everything but drinking water. The third definition attempts to capture the concept that the water body could be used for drinking water in the future, but would require a change in management or specialized treatment above current conventional methods in order to serve as a reliable drinking water supply. The fourth definition clarifies that full immune use is limited due to physical conditions, such as low or intermittent flow conditions, or elevated natural background constituent levels. Some of our stakeholders were intrigued with the idea of using non-potable as a way to capture the variety of potential levels of water quality that may be beneficial for some type of domestic use other than drinking water supply. And we spent a good portion of our June meeting discussing this option. But part of the discussion also included concern that the term was too broad and because the use could range from anything like washing a car, filling a swimming pool, or even doing laundry. So follow-up discussions with staff from both State Board and US EPA highlighted their concerns with using this broad, non-potable term. They also expressed concern with using natural background terminology, as it would be difficult to define in ephemeral streams. The preference expressed from both agencies was to use some combination of options 3 and 4, where the definition clearly identified some of the specific limitations to fully obtaining the immune use, for instance, the intermittent flow conditions, as you see in option 4. The combined language suggested here would capture the concepts listed for this revised option. So I'll go ahead and read that. Uses of water for municipal and domestic supply in agriculturally dominated surface water bodies where full use is limited by inherent conditions such as intermittent flow, management to maintain intended use of a constructed facility, and or constituent concentrations in source water. However, we anticipate changes to this option because we have yet to speak and review it with our larger stakeholder group. So any beneficial use needs associated water quality objectives to protect that use. And in our discussions with stakeholders, there has been general agreement that the limited MUNE water quality objective should ensure protection of downstream beneficial uses. And in addition, it should not allow the water body itself to degrade to a point that it is no longer meeting the current non-MUNE beneficial uses, or that it could not be economically managed or treated to provide a drinking water supply in the future. The difficulty has been coming up with language that can capture these concepts, especially to everyone sitting around the table. So there are three options we can look at for the type of water quality objectives we could use. The first would be using a narrative objective, or we could use a numeric objective, or some combination of both. But before we developed detailed options for the water quality objective, we worked with stakeholders to develop selection criteria so that it would help us clarify what we really wanted from this water quality objective. And the criteria includes consistency with relevant laws and policies, such as the anti-degradation policy, ensuring appropriate protection of the MUNE use, keeping in mind current or potential future use of MUNE, ensuring that the relevant water quality objectives downstream will be met, allowing water bodies to be used for their intended design and purpose, promoting efficient use of water board staff and stakeholder resources, and lastly, providing the flexibility to address elevated background constituents. On page 5 of the handout in table 2, we present various proposals for this limited MUNE beneficial use water quality objective. In addition, there are initial staff ratings using the selection criteria I just reviewed and a notes column. And I'm not going to read all 7 of these, but I do want to point out that the first 3 bring in the concept of protecting the water body itself for non-potable use, with the second option also including protection of downstream uses. The next 2 options roll in the concept of protecting the water body for future potential use as a drinking water source if alternative management or treatment are employed. And the remaining are more focused on broader concepts of protecting the water body from degradation and specifically bring in the use of the anti-degradation policy. In addition to reviewing against these options against the selection criteria, these key issues also surfaced and were discussed. In particular, there was concern that there are so many different types of non-potable uses that it's difficult to determine a flexible water quality objective that would be appropriate. There were suggestions of using non-flammable, non-corrosive, which not exactly the level of protection that we were trying to capture. Definitions and guidance for terms of managed and treated are also needed, especially relative to acceptable economic costs. For instance, conventional methods include filtration, but if there's excessive sedimentation, then your conventional costs are going to go way up. And so while there was agreement that we didn't want to unreasonably degrade a water body, there was also concern with inserting policy language as part of an objective. Numeric objectives were also considered, these three in particular. The first is to maintain human health criteria related to the primary MCLs, but removing the secondary MCLs. The second option was to keep the primary and secondary MCLs and remove the primary MCL for trihalomethanes. And the third was to include the primary and secondary MCLs, but use only dissolved fractions for constituents like metals. However, they all appear to have their own issues. They may not be as flexible for different types of water bodies, and they still may be too restrictive for ag-dominated water bodies. In addition, water purveyors have been reporting total fractions and secondary drinking standards to the public. After discussions with the stakeholders and also with staff from US EPA and the State Board, the following key points have surfaced. A narrative objective provides the most flexibility when dealing with the diversity of ag-dominated water body types in the Central Valley. US EPA staff in particular recommended that we stay away from specific numeric objectives. Both State Board and US EPA staff noted that they expect to see concepts from the anti-degradation policy as well as protection of downstream uses included as part of our final objective. They agreed that the policy could be generically mentioned within the narrative objective with guidance on how to evaluate it contained as part of the implementation program. So melding the various discussions that we had into a potential revised option, staff came up with the following. Water quality will be protected consistent with the state anti-degradation policy and will not negatively impact downstream beneficial uses. However, as with the new definition, this option has yet to be reviewed by our larger stakeholder group. And as I noted earlier, there is concern that incorporating reference to the anti-degradation policy within the water quality objective is not, we've had some concern from stakeholders over that. So we do expect a lively conversation when we next discuss this. Incorporating a reference to the state anti-degradation policy has been done previously and was recently approved for Region 8 for their secondary contact recreation or REC 2 beneficial use. This option does appear to give us flexibility to consider multiple factors when evaluating discharges into a water body that has a limited immune designation, such as source water characteristics, management of the system in the best interest of the people of the state, and of course, the ability to protect downstream uses. However, we fully expect that to make this option work, we will need to provide specific guidance within the implementation program that identifies some of the factors that we must consider when evaluating the appropriate level of protection. And the factors are listed here. As I mentioned earlier, evaluation of the source water and the physical characteristics of the water body, along with review of current management practices and looking at the potential for contaminants to accumulate in the water body or impact downstream beneficial uses. So we will be discussing this with our stakeholders as we fine-tune our final proposal. So this has been an update on where we are with the project, and our next steps include finishing the development of this limited immune beneficial use and developing draft language for our basin plan amendment. We'll also be tackling the issue of monitoring and surveillance at our next stakeholder meeting scheduled for September of this year. And our project timeline is as follows. We will be working on a CEQA environmental review and economic analysis this fall, followed by draft staff reports for peer and public review in the winter and spring, so that we can bring this again to the board for a workshop item in the spring of next year and a hearing in the summer of next year. So that concludes my portion, and time for comments and questions.
Thank you very much, Ann, for an interesting presentation. Nothing's easy, is it?
Nope.
Are there any questions? Yes.
It's more of a comment that I appreciate the work and the thoughtfulness that's gone into this. I think that this is an important project. I think the board has talked about it several times, and so I'm really glad to see that how much progress has been made. And I think that from what I've heard, it's a good balance of being cautious and also being realistic with the actual uses of these specific water venues. So thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I had a couple comments. One, of course, Willow Slough, thank you for using that example, but it does flow to the Ola bypass, which flows past Rio Vista and supplies water to the North Delta Canal. So I'm assuming when you're talking about protecting downstream uses, that would be in consideration of this type of use. So, and the other is just I want to ensure that this doesn't have impacts on our irrigated lands program with respect to herbicide, pesticide concentrations in these bodies.
I think it's going to be important that we work hand in hand with them on that for sure.
Any further board member questions or comments?
I just had a brief comment, and I thought it was a good presentation, and I'm just hopeful that the stakeholders can come into agreement with the definitions and the options that have been laid out, because it's definitely worthwhile and needs to move forward with the cooperation of everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
I found interesting the stakeholders' concern about including anti-dig issues within water quality objectives. I'm sure we'll hear more on that. Any further comments?
Maybe today.
With that, I'll go to the cards. Dennis, is it necessary for you to talk? Dennis checked if necessary on his card. That's why I asked the question.
Am I close enough to the mic? Okay. Dennis Westcott, San Joaquin Tributaries Authority. The 5 water districts that are part of our authority, Merced, Turlock, Modesto, South San Joaquin, and Oakdale irrigation districts, have about 1,800 miles of these channels. Most of them were constructed originally as ag water supply facilities and been used for over 100 years for that. Ann did an excellent job of laying out the whole issue to you, and I appreciate her presentation. This is the first time, of course, that we're seeing the recommendations that were on slide 14 and slide 22. As far as the beneficial use definition, it seems workable. We're going to talk about it in September when we sit down. But again, we're going to come in with our 2 criteria, and one was to maintain flexibility in our operations. And number 2 is to get us away from these unnecessary 303D listings that are costing us money, costing you money, and it's for unnecessary reasons. As far as the water quality objective that was presented on slide 22, it emphasizes the anti-degradation policy. We're going to have a pretty broad discussion of what that really means, because we need, and I've emphasized this to you before, maintaining flexibility in our operations. Right now, we are taking in wastewater from a couple of the cities and utilizing that in our crop production, because ag can use that kind of water. And in exchange, some of the other water is being used for a higher level of beneficial use. One of our cities, the city of Modesto, we supply them with our water. They supply us with groundwater, which doesn't meet drinking water standards. And they're putting that into our canals. In the future, we're going to be asked to take a number of different water sources into these canals, and that anti-degradation policy hopefully will not restrict that. And that's the kind of flexibility that we need in the future. And just one final comment on the water body categorization process. When there's 1,800 miles of these things and thousands of them, and we have to name them and go out and categorize them, we did this once back in 1995. That should be used as the baseline, but maybe we need to come up with something like your tributary rule. Your tributary rule, basically, when you didn't have the money and resources to look at all the small streams going back up into the hills, you tied them to the main water source. Well, unfortunately, it's backwards with our distribution system, our main water source, and then a bunch of distributaries. So maybe we need a distributary rule or something like that to, to make this process work. But again, we'll be in that stakeholder meeting. We look forward to it and look forward to the deliberations with you in the future.
Thank you, Dennis. Very valuable comments. Any questions? Thank you very much. The next card is from Alyssa Coleman.
Honorable board members, Honorable Board Chair and members, my name is Alyssa Coleman, and I'm a senior engineer with the City of Sacramento Department of Utilities. I'm here today for the Sacramento River Source Water Protection Program, sponsored by the cities of Sacramento and West Sacramento and the Sacramento County Department of Water Resources, and coordinated with other Sacramento River water utilities. I've been working on protecting drinking water quality in the Sacramento River watershed for 20 years. Our program seeks to maintain the high quality of the Sacramento River drinking water supply for the future and for the current and future generations. We have been actively providing stakeholder input during the MUN Beneficial Use Project, especially regarding development of the region-wide process. We do not conceptually oppose DE redesignation of agricultural water bodies, but we continue to be concerned that this project will cause an impact to our source water quality. We are concerned that a large number of water bodies upstream of our intakes and tributary to our drinking water supplies will have water quality protections removed or significantly reduced, which may result in cumulative long-term changes to our downstream source water quality. Degradation of downstream water supplies would likely shift an increasing burden of protecting public health onto the drinking water suppliers. Once contaminants are introduced into source water, it is very difficult and time-consuming to reverse trends, which then requires water utilities to either shift water supplies, if even possible, or attempt to implement treatment remedies. This degradation in water quality would reduce public health protection and increase costs of drinking water treatment. We do not believe that there is sufficient monitoring and analysis of drinking water constituents in the existing programs to provide ongoing support for DE redesignation. We have several key concerns with the development of the new limited MUN beneficial use definition. It may not directly include the downstream protections afforded in the sources of drinking water policy. The narrative water quality objectives previously provided to the stakeholder group appear to acknowledge allowable pollution. We do not believe that drinking water treatment should be included in the definition or objectives. If narrative objectives are selected, the implementation details are critical. We believe that a well-defined implementation plan is necessary, including specifics for tracking and assessing drinking water quality changes, identifying degradation early, and implementing action to correct problems rather than waiting for impairments to be identified. We will need to further consider the limited MUN definition and associated water quality objectives holistically as part of the complete project. We believe that board staff's recent work in response to input from EPA and state board staff is heading in a more productive direction for protecting downstream MUN water bodies. We request that the board consider carefully the importance of protecting the increasingly limited drinking water supplies. Thank you.
Go ahead, please.
Thank you. In the Central Valley for the long term. Maintaining source water quality is critical to providing a drinking water supply that protects public health at reasonable costs. We request that the board direct staff to consider the intent of the sources of drinking water policy for protecting California's drinking water supply when developing the limited MUN definition and associated water quality objectives, and to develop an implementation plan that specifically includes assessment and protection of downstream MUN designated water bodies. We appreciate the recent dialogue with board staff, and we will continue our stakeholder participation. Thank you for consideration of our requests.
Oh, thank you for your presentation, and I know you addressed the concerns of others too. But I think that in essence that slides 4, 5, and 6 presented by Ann Littlejohn gets to the process that we're talking about, and it's really in the implementation of that process. And what is limited mune that gets to the core of what you're talking about. I, for one, think that where staff is going is very important. At the same time, we need to consider your concerns and ensure that we can balance these at the same time, protecting drinking water sources at the same time, not overly regulating the limited mune areas. That's a difficult tightrope to walk, I admit, but I'm confident that staff can do that. I know these folks, they're good. Any further comments? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Why do I have a card from Debbie Webster? I would be surprised if I didn't have a card from Debbie Webster.
I was wondering if it was going to be David or I that was going to be called next. So thank
Yeah.
you, Debbie Webster, Executive Officer of the Central Valley Clean Water Association.
David who?
Corey,
Oh,
who's probably next after me. So, anyways, I wanted to say also I appreciate just the hard work that staff has done. They really have worked to address concerns, and you probably are saying, why are POTWs up here? But are being part of this process. I think we went through a process where we did have POTWs in agricultural facilities, and that was phase 1, and we're on a second phase. But I think Dennis, in his comments, just addressed probably addressed it best, is that we need to be able to manage water supplies. And if it means that in order for us to get recycled water to someone through a pipe, because we can't put it in a canal that's there, and therefore it makes it no longer viable for either the receiver or for us to pursue the project. That's not best management of water supplies if the water is not harming beneficial uses. And so, again, we want to see our projects be protective. We want to make sure that they're appropriately protective, but getting things right is so important. And so I really appreciate the board undergoing this process. We will, like everybody else, continue to be very active in this, and really hope to go through and come up with the best management options that we have out there.
Thank you, Debbie. Thank you for your comments. Any questions?
You know, I agree with Debbie. I mean, I think that as water is getting more and more scarce and we have the opportunity to reuse or repurpose water that we may not have had to reuse or repurpose in the past, you know, I mean, it's a really hard, like you said, a hard line to walk, because we want to be protective. I know that Debbie said that as well. And you know, and the gentleman that spoke first, you know, he talked about, you know, needing some flexibility, and I see those issues, you know, just so clearly, and they're so necessary at the same time. You know, we hear from, you know, the engineer from the city of Sacramento, and, you know, her concerns are certainly right up there with what our task as a board, you know, sort of what our task as a board is. And so, you know, you're going to have a hard job, and I'm glad. I certainly have the confidence. Sounds like Dr. Longley has the confidence as well, but we look forward to see what you can jointly develop in September. Both positions are equally important. So thank you for your comments.
Thank you, Debbie. David Corey.
Chair Longley, members of the board, David Corey, excuse me, representing the San Joaquin River Exchange contractors. I agree with everything that Debbie said and some of the back and forth that you had there. I would want to point out that I don't think we have a conflict of positions here at all. I mean, I think everybody who's working on the MUN process acknowledges we need to protect downstream uses and the actual MUN use. What we're saying is, in a lot of these water bodies, we have an MUN applied to it, but the use just isn't there. And we're going to have to change management practices. We're going to have to spend a lot of money to protect a use that doesn't really exist for no benefit. And we're trying to work through that. I remember the board, I was here when the Live Oak issue came up in front of the board. I just being a groupie, I happened to be here, I guess. But I remember you guys struggling with that decision. And you sort of came to a soft place where you could get through the legal problems that you had in front of you, and it worked out well. But it took a lot of staff time, and it was a very difficult decision to deal with. If we don't address this across the entire Central Valley, we're going to have live oaks across the Central Valley. And I really commend staff and this board for putting the resources into dealing with it now. But remember, we're not looking at impacting actual uses. We need to protect those MUN uses that exist. We're trying to avoid this sort of regulatory problem, this legal problem that you guys faced in Live Oak across the board. And I'd like to address one question that Bob brought up about how this impacts with the Irrigated Lands Program. On the west side, we have most of our exceedances in our exceedance reports deal with salinity exceedances, and a lot of those have to do with the MUN numbers. If we were to spend all of our time and resources trying to address protecting the MUN uses in those water bodies, we wouldn't have the resources to protect the actual problems that are out there, to deal with our pesticide issues, our sediment issues, those things that actually are problems that we need to deal with. So it defers our resources to a problem that doesn't exist. And we only have so much sort of time, money, and energy to address problems. We need to address those problems that actually do exist. So, thank you.
Any questions for David Corey? Thank you again, David. Any further discussion by members of the board?
I had a couple comments.
Go
I
ahead.
had a couple comments, and I was thinking while we're addressing up the volume on the mics, maybe we can dress down the volume on the chimes just a little bit. I just wanted to, I appreciate what Dennis said about the repurposing with Merced and utilizing water. So our staff and Lil John and others now not only are trying to address this limited MUN, but they're working to solve drought and climate change issues. So thank you. I just wanted to, I guess it's meaningful, a comment in that these things are related, and David or Debbie's comments about efficient use of resources, that includes water, and that includes financial resources, and that includes time, both for our staff and for the users and the regulated community. And that is a primary goal, I think, for this board and how we function to try and find the best answers to those questions. So thank you.
And I concur with Bob's comments. I guess what I appreciate about this item and the previous item is they're addressing issues. David, thank you for bringing up Live Oak. They address issues that come up in front of this board repeatedly. And if you stay on this board, you get tired of, you're wondering why can't we find a way to systematically address these particular issues rather than having them come up in front of us and scratch our heads and trying to figure out what to do. And I do appreciate staff. I do appreciate our executive officer bringing in front of us efforts to come up with ways that we can more systematically address these. They are complex issues, or they probably would have been addressed already. And so the answers that come out sometimes may seem a little broad, but it's a huge spectrum that has to be captured, and to be able to do that sometimes takes broad answers. And I suspect that over time that they'll be fine-tuned down, but I'll be long gone when that happens. So, no, what I'm saying is we're talking in terms of 10, 20, 30 years. If you could come back and look at these, at what's adopted eventually, it'll change and it'll become more specific in certain areas as we gain experience. Yes, Patrick.
Yeah, Dr. Longley, you asked at the onset of the public comment period an explanation for why there was some reluctance to include anti-degradation in the definition of the new water quality objective. And I think you heard a little bit of that both in Dennis's comment and in the comments by the water providers. the anti-degradation policy does apply regardless of whether we put it into the use or not. The concern is if we are adding that to the water quality objective itself, how will we implement that in term, will we do it differently? Will we do it more aggressively or less aggressively? And I think that's the concern that you're hearing from both sides of this, both the water providers and the folks that are affected by that MUN designation. And I think it's again, it's an issue that Ann's group is wrestling with. If we include that, how will we implement that? And that's really what the conversation is evolving to.
Thank you for that clarification. Yes, John.
Just because this is an informational item and you're probably looking for some feedback, not that I have technical feedback, but along the lines of what others have said, this effort does seem important that we get it right. There is both water quality impacts and practical impacts to what we're doing, and so I support the initiative. I want to make sure we do hit the right balance, but so I don't have any really guidance other than to say that all the issues that Carl brought up, Patrick brought up, we know are there to be solved, and if we, I think what David said, the soft spot or the middle ground or wherever we can get to that makes it work, great. Hopefully we get there.
Yeah. Yes, and I really don't have any dramatic comments saying I think you should do this or that, other than saying I think you're on the right track. I think the board would like to stay informed. For a lot of this, that can be through the executive officer's report. So good job, keep it up, and we're looking forward to see you the next time around. I might point out, as you're probably all aware, Jeannie is the person in charge of CV salts on a day-to-day basis, and I have known from working with her there that I expect great results. Any further comments? Very good. We will recess. Before we recess, Council, will we be discussing anything during closed session?
We have two matters to discuss in closed session today. The first matter is a matter regarding the 16-1 mine case, which I just lost on here. It is listed in our agenda as item, help me out here. Litigation filed by the Central Valley Ward against other parties, item D. The board will also be considering a referral to the Attorney General for injunctive relief on another case.
Thank you very much. And we will recess until 1 o'clock.